Hello, and welcome to my presentation entitled What Has Seoul to Do with Jerusalem? Western Missionaries in Korea and the Relationship Between Civilization and Christianity. This is a presentation that I will give at the South Carolina Historical Annual Meeting on March 16, 2013. Now, the basic question I'm asking in this presentation is, how did Western missionaries understand the connection between civilization and Christianity in late 19th and early 20th century Korea? In this presentation, I'll briefly examine some Catholic views, and then I'll look very closely at two Protestant missionaries. And the reason I want to do this is I want to ask how, in particular, did American national identity influence them? Now, the reason I'm placing more emphasis on Protestants in this presentation is because I've done a lot of work on Catholics, and I am just starting my work on Protestant Christianity. So this is very much a work in progress, and I think there's going to be some people familiar with American history here who can give me some insight into how the Protestant missionaries are going to understand their religion and American civilization. So Koreans hoped that by adopting Western civilization they could strengthen Korea, and some of the more radical ones in fact wanted to form a whole new modern nation state. There was a debate among Koreans though about what made civilization possible, and some Koreans were going to argue that it was Western religion, that it was Christianity that had made Westerners so powerful. And as we've seen, this resonates with this old Neo-Confucian idea that if you believe in the right doctrine and that you act in accordance to it, good things will happen. The Western religion being the source of civilization was also encouraged by the missionaries who were in Korea. Koreans didn't have to go west or even go to Japan to run into Western civilization enlightenment. They could just do it in Korea itself. And it was being introduced to them by these missionaries, and we'll see in particular these American Protestant missionaries would encourage this idea that it was Western civilization, or Western religion, that built up a powerful Western civilization. And this is going to have some credibility because it's not these Western countries that are threatening Japan or Korea so much, it's Japan, a non-Christian country. And so these missionaries are going to have a certain amount of credibility and trustworthiness with Koreans, and that's going to lead to some Koreans embracing Christianity. So Koreans hoped that by adopting Western civilization they could strengthen Korea, and some of the more radical ones in fact wanted to form a whole new modern nation state. There was a debate among Koreans though about what made civilization possible, and some Koreans were going to argue that it was Western religion, that it was Christianity that had made Westerners so powerful. And as we've seen, this resonates with this old Neo-Confucian idea that if you believe in the right doctrine and that you act in accordance to it, good things will happen. The Western religion being the source of civilization was also encouraged by the missionaries who were in Korea. Koreans didn't have to go west or even go to Japan to run into Western civilization enlightenment. They could just do it in Korea itself. And it was being introduced to them by these missionaries, and we'll see in particular these American Protestant missionaries would encourage this idea that it was Western civilization, or Western religion, that built up a powerful Western civilization. And this is going to have some credibility because it's not these Western countries that are threatening Japan or Korea so much, it's Japan, a non-Christian country. And so these missionaries are going to have a certain amount of credibility and trustworthiness with Koreans, and that's going to lead to some Koreans embracing Christianity. It is important to note, though, that not all kinds of Christianity are the same. There's very different forms of Christianity. The first form of Christianity to come to Korea was Catholicism, and this came through books written in classical Chinese, primarily in the early 17th century, by Jesuit missionaries in China, and Koreans read classical Chinese just fine, so they were able to learn about this religion through books. Some of these people reading about the books would later decide this Catholicism thing sounded really good, and they imported it into Korea. They actually sent in 1784 a Korean scholar to Beijing where he was baptized, came back, baptized more Koreans, and so when the first missionary came a decade later in 1794, a Chinese man, a Chinese priest, there were already about 1,000 Korean Catholics. So in some ways this was a very good start for Catholicism in Korea. The problem that they faced though was the Korean state did not like Catholicism, it saw it as a threat, and Catholics were persecuted throughout the late 18th and 19th centuries. The persecution of Catholics led to a kind of ghetto church. Korean Catholics became very otherworldly, very detached from a society and a government that wanted them dead. And even when Korea began to open up in the 19th century, for many Korean Catholics, this didn't change because the people who were coming to them to work among them, the priests that were being sent out, the missionaries that were being sent out, were French missionaries who often did not like modernity. They didn't trust it because they saw modernity in France as being a kind of club that was used to beat the church. And many of them were very critical of Protestant ideas of civilization in particular. So these guys are not very fond of modernity or civilization. They see it as the enemy of Christianity. And you can see this in particular in the case of one Korean Catholic who wanted to get out of this ghetto church, and he proposed the idea of establishing a Catholic university on the grounds that it would both help the faith and help the country. And this man pictured here, Bishop Gustave Moutel, the head of the Catholic Church in Korea, rejected this idea. And what I find fascinating is he didn't reject it by saying we don't have the money for it, which would have been true. He rejected it by saying that an education would cause Catholics to become lukewarm to their faith. So for the Catholics, there's this kind of hostility towards civilization. That brings us then to Protestants, in particular Presbyterians. The Presbyterians were among the first Protestant missionaries to come to Korea, and I thought it especially be appropriate, since we're at Presbyterian University, to focus on them. I'm going to look at a married couple, in particular, Reverend Horace G. Underwood, who was the first ordained Protestant minister into Korea, and his wife, Dr. Lilias Underwood, a medical doctor. They actually were unmarried when they went to Korea, but then met, fell in love, and got married while they were there. And one thing we need to note about them right away is that they saw civilization as a good thing. For example, late 19th century Korean politics were very dangerous. A lot of people got killed. If your faction was thrown out of power, this often meant that you would either die or you would have to flee the country. And several Koreans in the 19th century did flee the country, and one of these, Yoon Chi-ho, converted to Methodist Christianity while he was abroad. He was a very important figure both in the drive for Korean modernizing reform and in the early Protestant church. And Reverend Underwood, talking about this, wrote to the mission board back home saying at least some of these Korean men should be taught Christianity and civilization by the Presbyterians. So he connects these two things, right? He says we need to teach them both things. So he sees civilization as definitely being a good thing, ranking right up there with Christianity. And Reverend Underwood was able to make this link because he saw Christian morality at the heart of Western civilization. And he believed that this morality and the power of Western civilization was based on the right Christian doctrine that Western Christians believed in. And he thought that this civilization, the power that came from it, came from a moral transformation that arose from belief in Christianity. In particular, he said he believed that Christianity would make people literate, honest, sober, diligent, and careful with money. So you can see this kind of connection with capitalism and economic development right there. And he also stressed that people would believe in Jesus if Christian missionaries and converts act in this way, if they followed this. They really stress having a major change in life resulting from religious conversion as a way of spurring on more religious conversion. So it's very similar to Neo-Confucianism in many ways. This idea of right doctrine leads to right action, leads to human flourishing. But one of the big differences was the content of the morality was very, very different. For example, to really follow Neo-Confucian morality correctly in Korea, you had to be wealthy. You had to be very wealthy. So there was this very strong connection between status, wealth, and morality, whereas anyone could theoretically follow the Protestant morality. Protestant morality was equal. Now, to give you an example of this kind of difference in equality and hierarchy that you see between Protestant Christianity and Neo-Confucianism, I want to look briefly at these two pictures. The one picture is of the lady who's covered. She's a very elite woman. She's an upper class lady. So ideally she's not supposed to leave the house. She's supposed to remain secluded and not really labor outside the house. She's supposed to have servants to do that kind of thing. So that way she can maintain proper Neo-Confucian ideas of modesty and chastity. And if she does have to go out, she's going to cover herself in this way. On the other lady is a lower class lady who, as you can see, is going out to work. And she is not modest. She's showing a lot of skin. In fact, she's even showing her breasts. And so she's a lower kind of lady, a lower kind of woman in Confucian morality. But of course, the ideal Protestant Christians would have challenged this idea of equality. Would say women should be modest, but should also be able to go out. And of course, basically what they would try and do is make woman basically adopt the dress of the poor woman and just make her cover up her breasts. But the idea here that I want to stress is you have this idea of equal morality arising from Christianity. The connection between civilization and Protestant Christianity was often expressed in institutional ways, particularly in the medical field. One of the first modern hospitals, I believe the first modern hospital in Korea, was established essentially as a joint venture between Protestant Christian missionaries and the Korean government. And that's Severance Hospital, which is now part of Yonsei University, the top Christian private university in Korea. Now, medicine is very important. What I find fascinating is that Catholics didn't really send doctors during this time period. They sent priests and nuns, and the priests were not generally trained in medicine. I don't know of any who were at this time. In comparison, as we've seen, the Presbyterians sent this female doctor, this lady doctor, Dr. Underwood, to work in Korea. So you see a big difference here. And her husband, Reverend Underwood, in 1904, when the Severance Memorial Hospital was opened, he gave a speech there that was carried in a Western missionary journal. It's very interesting, this speech, because he really stresses here the linkage between modern medicine and Christianity. For one thing, he argues that modern medicine is the fruit of Western Christian civilization, and that the Christian idea of service necessitates that you share this fruit with people that don't have it. So there's this idea of we just need to do good as Christians. We need to love other people and take care of them and help them when they can. But he also understood modern medicine as leading to conversion. It would teach Koreans to believe that a little medicine properly applied in the case of typhoid fever will do more good than the pounding of tambourines or the burning of paper prayers to paper gods. So this would show the uselessness of the old gods, paving the way for conversion to the new one, belief in which we know is accurate, is true. You can believe in this God because by believing in him, you do right action, and that leads to this kind of growth in civilization and medicine that's able to heal you and cure you when you couldn't be cured before. And in fact, it was generally credited by Protestant missionaries, Western medicine was generally credited with being what brought acceptance of Western missionaries into the Hermit Kingdom. That it was the Protestant missionaries were able to gain access because of their medical skills, whereas Catholics were generally persecuted and distrusted by the court. Protestants weren't. And you can see this concretely. The first, in 1884, the first Korean missionary to Korea was a medical doctor. He's actually, during one of these coup attempts, the Queen's nephew was severely injured, and this Protestant Methodist doctor actually saved that man's life, saved the Queen's nephew's life. And that, after that, of course, the Korean court really lavished praise and attention on these Protestant missionaries and really trusted them. So this is really key in helping to gain Protestants credibility in Korean society. What's also very important to note, though, is that this wasn't just a social gospel. These Protestant missionaries really emphasized the idea of the salvation of souls. And I found this, I want to give this complete quote to you because I found it fascinating. This is from an article from a missionary journal on Korean houses. And most of the article is spent just describing Korean houses, but includes this passage here. I suppose some of my younger readers are asking about how the Korean children, what are they like and how do they appear? Well, in answer to this, I will tell you that they are not unlike children at home. They run around and play in the mud, make mud pies, etc. They are gifted with 2 hands, 2 eyes, a mouth, 2 ears. They can run, walk, shout, play, laugh, cry, sing, and do all that others do. Furthermore, they have never-dying souls that must either live in heaven with Jesus and his angels or be lost forever. And they have no one to tell them that the blessed Christ died for them. They do not know that there is a heaven. When they come to die, it is all dark, and they do not know where they are going to. And we wish that the children of America who know so much about these things to help in sending the gospel to them. So this kind of makes sense, right? This clearly shows this interest in salvation, and this is primarily why they're there. And they're so interested in salvation that they managed to work in a plea for the money and support for the missions in an article on Korean houses. What I find particularly fascinating, though, is what happens next. Without any transition, the next sentence reads, "The little girls fare the worst. They are thought nothing of, except that they can be sold at any time to be nothing but slaves to husbands that already have several wives. We do not help teach these people something better." I find it so fascinating that there's no transition here. There's this clear, close link between salvation, between accepting the Christian message and having correct moral behavior. In this terms, moral behavior being modern concept of gender relations, accepting monogamy, which means equality in a sense, versus polygamy, which emphasizes inequality. And this wasn't just what Reverend Underwood believed. His wife, Dr. Underwood, would also emphasize this in articles that she wrote. While acknowledging that salvation was the most important, she really emphasized that Christianity led to real improvements in the everyday life of people, primarily through the moral transformation of husbands, leading to them treating their wives better. And this was often understood in a capitalist way, that by giving up drinking and going to prostitutes and having concubines, they would have more wives, more money to provide for their wives. There's also, though, a tension between this kind of doing good, this emphasis on salvation, and this idea of doing good to help Koreans and help the Korean nation. And we can see that in this article about Min Young-hwan. Min Young-hwan was an important Korean official. He was basically an incorruptible man. He was a man very much dedicated to the reform and strengthening of Korea, and was willing to sacrifice himself to that end. In 1905, Japan forced Korea to sign a treaty that took away much of Korea's sovereignty, and in protest, Min Young-hwan committed suicide. In a secular journal, a journal published in Korea that was secular, Dr. Underwood described him in the highest of terms, praising his magnificent unselfishness, his faithful devotion, his love of his country, which was only representative of thousands of his countrymen, and only one of the great mass of those whom Christianity and civilization would develop. And she also noted in this article that he saw Christianity and Christian-based reform as key to saving the nation. What's fascinating, though, was he himself was not a Christian, though he was praised for conducting his household on the most approved principles of civilized peoples. So it's interesting, he didn't believe in Christian doctrine, but he was still kind of accepting the right morality. And that tension really isn't explored in this article, and this kind of raises the question, which was more important, civilization or salvation? Now, this question could be kind of answered simply by that she didn't think it would be polite to say that maybe this guy was in hell in his eulogy, essentially, but I think it does expose this tension, and this is an area I want to work more on in the future. So, in conclusion, we see that these missionaries reacted in very different ways. Catholic missionaries showed a distrust of civilization as dangerous to the faith, and so tried to actively, not only didn't support it, but tried to actively stop their flock from being too connected to it. Protestant missionaries, in contrast, saw civilization as the outgrowth of true faith. They believed very strongly that correct moral behavior would bring the benefits brought by Western civilization, and that this correct moral behavior could and should, in fact, bring conversions. Therefore, they were active in society in ways that Catholics weren't. They were much more active. And one thing I didn't mention, of course, that made them able to be more active was they had a lot more money. So, but money aside, this kind of basic Protestant idea was more in line with Neo-Confucianism than Catholicism was. This idea of right moral behavior, rising from right doctrine, leading to human flourishing. And I think this is one reason why Protestant growth is going to outstrip Catholic growth during this time period. Now, this is very much a work in progress. I would appreciate any comments. Right now, I plan on looking at more of these particular Protestant missionaries, Reverend Dr. Underwood, as well as others. And I also want to look at American Catholics, because they start showing up in 1923, and I want to see if they're very much different from, or the same as Protestant American missionaries. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions and comments.